Good morning. I'm delighted to join you today from the University of British Columbia. Before we begin, I would like to respectfully acknowledge that the lands on which UBC campuses are located include the ancestral and unceded territories of the Musqueam, the peoples of the Okanagan nations, and other nations. We are here today from many different places near and far, and I acknowledge the traditional owners and caretakers of those lands as well. My task in the next 4.5 minutes is to present some of my reflections about yesterday. As many have already said, I found the day to be informative, exhilarating, cathartic, and most importantly for me, bold in naming experiences and identifying actions. This much needed boldness is my most important takeaway. Universities need to lead discussions of justice and not react to them. I hope we began such a bold, proactive journey yesterday. Let me share a few more reflections. One, I heard a call loud and clear to reject the false binary between inclusion and excellence. This dichotomy is based on certain limited, unsophisticated, ahistorical understandings of excellence. We have more sophisticated understandings of excellence which capture the context of systemic injustice in which academic work or any work takes place. These broader and more sophisticated understandings of excellence begin with the rejection of the deficit model, but perhaps we can take it even further to audaciously turn the deficit model on its head. We can begin to identify the deficits in the models of excellence which normalize exclusion and seek to correct them with an understanding of Black excellence, which is inclusive and transformative. Second, we need to do everything we can to increase voice and representation of Blackness in the academy. Black studies programs, cluster hires, proactive recruitment, policy change, strategic initiatives are all necessary. We know that we have started some of these actions and they will take time. In the meantime, beginning now, this very moment, we can begin to stop the denials, the erasures, the tokenism, the microaggressions, and so on. Yes, we can ask for more education, but we can also embark on self-education. That is the first act of responsible allyship. We know enough to not to have an excuse to be unaware of the harm that is being caused daily to our colleagues and students as a result of some existing practices. This would mean calling out a racist act when we see it, and to refuse to deny or trivialize experiences of racism. This will happen if we develop proper processes and use existing processes correctly. At the very least, we can stop using process as an excuse to prevent action. In this context, it was also, again, boldly acknowledged that when racialized people do find themselves in senior levels of institutions, in decision-making structures, they may choose or feel the need to embrace the status quo rather than challenge it. This means that all of us must remain vigilant, that we retain our critical voices, our own critical voices, and support and amplify others as they try to raise theirs. Third, we do not need to pit marginalized groups against one another to advance justice. Justice is not a zero-sum game. Justice for Black lives or Indigenous lives can walk hand in hand in solidarity and learn from each other. In order to hear Joyce's cry, "Please help me," we do not need to mute "I can't breathe" or forget that 1 in 8 Canadian households are now food insecure, or the horror that COVID is causing for our parents and grandparents. These are all journey towards the same goal. Fourth and final, and first and foremost, our students. Our students are both the present and the future of higher education and of a just society. There are many ways in which we need to empower our students to work towards the goals of a just society. The curriculum, beginning from K-12 to the university, are key sites of education and empowerment. We had a very rich discussion on curriculum chaired by Professor Wayne. I hope that in discussing our future actions, we can bring back some of the insights on learning, both inside and outside the classroom, as we forge the path towards inclusive higher education. There were a lot more specifics, and I'm sure we will talk more about them today, but these are some of the main insights that stood out for me. It is now my pleasure to introduce Theresa Rajack-Talley, Vice Provost, Equity and Inclusion, Dalhousie University, to do the next presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ananya. You did an excellent job in summarizing what took place yesterday, the opportunities, the challenges, and the principles. Before I start my 10-minute presentation, I also want to acknowledge that Dalhousie sits on the unceded and traditional territory of the Mi'kmaq people, and that October marks Mi'kmaq History Month. Today, we are going to deal with action and accountability and take that positive energy yesterday and move it to how to. Institutions of higher learning, universities, colleges have always been at a crossroad between two extremities. We operate on a continuum. Are we transformative institutions, or are we institutions that reproduce and sustain status quo? A status quo that we inherited from colonialism, Eurocentrism, patriarchy, and racism. I think everybody at this conference acknowledges that we are agents of change and can be agents of change. And so today we deal with the aspects of racism and how do we deal with racism. I treat racism as a disease, a deadly disease as we know it. And if you are to treat a deadly disease, say for cancer, you have to know what type of cancer we have and where in the body it's located. So slide 1, please. Research has shown that racism occurs at 3 different levels. They're not necessarily mutually exclusive, and they're very interactive. The first level that is well known is the individual level. This is the most common level that we know, and this is what we usually do. We treat it as unconscious and unconscious bias, intentional and non-intentional. But even when we do this, the focus again is on the dominant narrative. According to one of my students, he says, Dr. Talley, I can't get conscious and unconscious bias. This is a Black male. He said, because I'm at the outcome of that. So we need to shift that conversation to focus on the people who are negatively affected. So this is not widely addressed. The outcomes of discrimination from intentional and non-intentional and the harmful effect. What we also don't address at the individual level is that we tend to say that we follow guidelines and policies and rules and regulations, but at any point of the decision-making process, individuals use discretion, and that discretion is affected by the dominant ideology and way of thinking in society, which includes racism in most societies. So it's not just a few bad apples. Bad apples do fall from the diseased trees. Next slide. The second level is the organizational level. At this level, we rarely focus on it because again, what has happened over time, how we operate at the unit, in our office, in our faculty, in our program and so on, is treated as norm. Yesterday, we heard about the normalization of white privilege to the exclusion of everybody else. Again, we use the fact that we have developed over time certain policies, certain codes of conduct, core values and so on. But what we do not address is the unwritten policies, the unwritten practices, the unwritten beliefs, the culture that exists within organizations. So what we tend to do is we tend to normalize it, avoid it, or deflect from it. And so we go back to the bad apple in the organization. But actions are often produced and reproduces the status quo. And so sometimes we hide under the concept of reverse discrimination, academic freedom, individual freedom, and so on, freedom of speech. But we have to challenge these things at the organizational level if we are honest about dealing with racism. I have an example of a mature Black female who was on the phone crying, who worked for an institution for over 30 years, sacrificing to her family, and finally broke down. And she said, I can't do it anymore. I can't take this toxic environment anymore. And nobody can address it. Racism is one of the most difficult concept or challenge to prove. And so that has to be dealt at the organizational level. Next slide. The structural level. As it says on this slide, individuals work in organizations and organizations create structures. Discrimination takes place and is supported by the structural level. Structural level allows for discrimination and is self-sustaining. And the best example I can give is the Black Lives Matter around George Floyd. You know, it's very difficult to hear people say they do not believe in institutional racism or systemic racism. My question is, how many more people must die for you to accept that there's systemic racism in society? And again, I try to use the birdcage effect. If you look at one bar, in this case, the criminal justice system, even if you do not accept that systemic racism exists in the criminal justice system, look at the other areas. Look at what happens in housing, in politics, in economics, and in the educational system. And you will see that trapped within these bars are certain communities, which are basically our underrepresented populations. So we cannot no longer deny that structural racism exists unless we want to go back to the one bar system and not the birdcage effect. Last slide, please. Moving forward. This is the challenge to everybody participating in the forum today, the how to. You know, how do we move beyond the individual level of thinking? And how do we address it at the individual level thinking? Do we keep focusing on whether it's intentional and non-intentional, conscious or unconscious, or do we shift the focus a little more to the people who are at the brunt end of this? Also too, how do we alleviate the pervasiveness and the continuance of the systemic outcomes of racism? How do we address the organizational level? Is it through policies? Is it through guidelines? Is it through core values? Or is it through the culture, or all of the above? How we could build on these things? How do we move from initiatives and special programs and so on, which are important, but in themselves are not empowering or sustainable and not structural? In other words, if we agree that systemic racism and racism itself is not a simple issue, then can we come up with a simple solution? How do we alleviate systemic racism and build structures within our universities? I like to equate it to technology. Can, as an Institute of Higher Learning, can we exist without Wi-Fi? Can we exist without the infrastructure that provides this service to us? So why are we not treating EDI in a similar way? Why do we think that we could exist without EDI existing in everything we do, in our structures, processes, decision-making at the individual, organizational, and structural level? And then last but not least, accountable. Who are we accountable to? Should we be accountable to the status quo? Because that's what we normally do when we make these reports. Who do we present it to? And that's where I put in there, what is the role of the community? Meaning the underrepresented populations and their communities, the BIPOC communities. Because we cannot even trust ourselves. As intellectuals, we have a role to play. As an institution of higher learning, we can be agents of change, but who keeps us? Who are the auditors of what we do? Because we all have jobs we could lose, we have a tenure to get, promotions and so forth, money to get. Board of directors also have to follow. How could we finance the institutions? The people who have the most to lose are the communities that we are supposed to be representing. They're the ones, in my view, can hold us accountable. So these are some of the questions that I posed today. So I know I have a minute left, but I just want to wish the conference participants all the best. Keep the energy going, and let's be agent of change. We have been accused of being talk shops at universities and colleges and institutions of higher learning. Let's prove them wrong. Let's move across the pendulum from reproducing and maintaining status quo to agents of change. So I wish you all the best and good luck in the deliberations for today. Thank you, and join you in the workshops. You have 35 seconds to have a little break before you join your sessions.